The air in the executive boardroom crackled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife, as the security guard's hand hovered just inches from Judge Judy's shoulder. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would expose a conspiracy, so shocking that it would send ripples through every corporate law firm in America, leaving millions of viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about justice in our legal system. Judge Judy Files, the iron-willed television judge who had commanded respect for decades, stood surrounded by a circle of corporate security personnel, her eyes blazing with the quiet fury of someone who had just uncovered a truth so devastating it could topple empires built on legal manipulation. The head of security, his voice trembling with barely concealed urgency, delivered the message that would ignite a firestorm. Judge Files, Karen Morrison has personally ordered your immediate removal from these premises. But what neither Karen nor her army of lawyers could have anticipated was that Judge Judy had spent the last 3 weeks conducting her own investigation into Morrison Industries, uncovering a web of legal corruption that stretched from small-town courthouses to the highest levels of corporate America. What she discovered wasn't just unethical, it was a systematic pattern of using legal loopholes as weapons to destroy innocent families while generating millions in profit. The security team expected compliance, perhaps a quiet exit to avoid embarrassment, as countless others had done when faced with Morrison Industries' overwhelming legal machine. They were entirely unprepared for what Judge Judy had hidden in her briefcase evidence, so damning it would expose how America's legal system had been weaponized against its own citizens. This wasn't just another corporate dispute or a clash of egos. This was about Martha Rodriguez, a 67-year-old grandmother whose family restaurant was systematically destroyed by Karen's legal team, driving her to bankruptcy and an early grave while Karen celebrated another victory at her country club. Judge Judy met the security chief's nervous gaze with the steely resolve that had made her a household name, her voice cutting through the corporate atmosphere like a blade. Tell Karen Morrison that I have evidence of what she did to Martha Rodriguez and dozens of others, and absolutely nothing is going to stop me from presenting it to that auditorium full of her business partners. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for Morrison Industries' carefully crafted reputation, because what Judge Judy was about to reveal would prove that Karen hadn't just bent the rules, she had shattered them entirely, leaving a trail of destroyed lives in her wake. If you're ready to witness the moment when America's toughest judge took down one of the most corrupt corporate executives in history, hit that like button right now and drop a gavel emoji in the comments below. What you're about to see will shatter everything you believed about how justice really works in corporate America, and reveal the shocking truth about how powerful people use our legal system as their personal weapon. This isn't just entertainment. This is a masterclass in what happens when someone with real authority refuses to be silenced by money and intimidation. It all began 3 weeks earlier, on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day that starts quietly, but carries within it the seeds of something extraordinary. Judge Judy was reviewing case files in her Manhattan office when her assistant knocked on the door, holding a phone with an expression that suggested this wasn't just another routine call. The voice on the other end belonged to Rebecca Martinez, personal assistant to Karen Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, one of the largest corporate consulting firms on the East Coast. Her tone was honeyed with the kind of practiced charm that expensive PR firms teach their clients, each word carefully selected to convey importance and exclusivity. Judge Files, Rebecca began, her voice practically radiating enthusiasm. Ms. Morrison would be deeply honored if you would consider being our keynote speaker at the annual Corporate Legal Excellence Summit. We're talking about an audience of over 2,000 of the nation's most influential business leaders, executives, and legal professionals. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the magnitude of the opportunity sink in before continuing. Ms. Morrison specifically requested you, because she believes your unique perspective on justice and accountability would provide invaluable insights to help these leaders understand how proper legal procedures can create more ethical and profitable business outcomes. But Judge Judy hadn't survived decades in the legal system by accepting things at face value, especially when they came wrapped in corporate speak and delivered with theatrical enthusiasm. Something about Rebecca's carefully crafted pitch struck a discordant note that resonated deep in her judicial instincts. The phrase profitable business outcomes hung in the air like a red flag, because in Judge Judy's experience, when corporations started talking about profit and legal procedures in the same breath, it usually meant someone was about to get screwed, and it wasn't going to be the people with expensive lawyers. Rebecca continued her pitch, seemingly oblivious to the growing skepticism on the other end of the line. The theme of this year's summit is maximizing legal advantages in modern business. and we believe your expertise could help our attendees understand how to navigate complex legal challenges while maintaining the highest standards of corporate responsibility. The words flowed smoothly, but Judge Judy's finely tuned bullshit detector was already sending up warning signals. In her decades of experience, she had learned that when people talked about maximizing legal advantages and corporate responsibility, in the same sentence they were usually planning to do something that would make her want to bang her gavel until it broke. The compensation package Rebecca outlined was certainly generous, almost suspiciously so. A 5-figure speaking fee, first-class accommodations, and what she described as an opportunity to influence how America's business leaders approach legal decision-making. But Judge Judy had built her reputation on reading between the lines, and what she was reading between these particular lines made her stomach turn. This wasn't an invitation to share wisdom about justice. This felt like a carefully orchestrated attempt to get her endorsement for practices that she suspected would make her want to hold someone in contempt of court. As Rebecca wrapped up her pitch with promises of how much the business community would benefit from Judge Judy's unique perspective on efficient legal resolution, the judge found herself wondering what exactly Morrison Industries thought she would say that would help them maximize their legal advantages. Did they expect her to teach corporate executives how to intimidate plaintiffs into settling? Were they hoping she would provide strategies for overwhelming small-time lawyers with paperwork and procedural delays? The very thought made her blood pressure rise, because if there was one thing Judge Judy couldn't stomach, it was the abuse of legal power to crush people who couldn't fight back. Judge Judy's response was carefully measured, her years of judicial experience having taught her the value of gathering information before making decisions. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her voice carrying just enough interest to keep the conversation going, while revealing nothing of her growing suspicions. "This sounds like quite an impressive event. I'd like some time to review the materials and consider how I might contribute meaningfully to your summit." What she didn't tell Rebecca was that she had already decided to conduct her own investigation into Morrison Industries, because something about this invitation felt like a setup, and Judge Judy had never walked into a courtroom unprepared in her life. After ending the call, Judge Judy sat in her office for several long minutes, staring out at the Manhattan skyline while her mind processed what she had just heard. The pieces of the puzzle were already forming a picture she didn't like, but she needed more information before she could be certain. She had learned long ago that in the legal world, the most dangerous opponents were the ones who hid their true intentions behind flowery language and generous offers. If Morrison Industries was trying to buy her credibility to legitimize questionable practices, they had picked the wrong judge. The invitation packet that arrived by courier the next morning only deepened her suspicions. Glossy brochures showcased previous summit speakers, all of whom seemed to specialize in helping corporations optimize legal strategies and minimize litigation exposure. The agenda was filled with sessions on topics like advanced settlement, negotiation techniques, leveraging procedural advantages, and managing class action vulnerabilities. These weren't workshops on justice and fairness. They were masterclasses in legal warfare designed to help big corporations crush anyone who dared to challenge them. But it was the brief biography of Karen Morrison herself that really caught Judge Judy's attention. The official version painted her as a visionary leader who had revolutionized corporate legal consulting by helping businesses navigate complex regulatory environments. What it didn't mention was the growing whisper network of lawyers who had faced Morrison's tactics in court, stories of legal intimidation, procedural manipulation, and the systematic exploitation of power imbalances that left smaller opponents financially and emotionally devastated. Judge Judy closed the invitation packet and reached for her phone, dialing the number of her longtime friend and investigator Tony Chen, a former NYPD detective who now specialized in corporate research. "Tony," she said when he answered, "I need you to dig into a company called Morrison Industries and its CEO Karen Morrison. I want to know everything: financial records, legal cases, employee complaints, and especially any patterns of litigation they've been involved in." She paused, her judicial instincts already telling her what he was likely to find. "And Tony, I have a feeling this one's going to get ugly." As she hung up the phone, Judge Judy felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through countless difficult cases. If Karen Morrison thought she could use Judge Judy's reputation to legitimize predatory legal practices, she was about to learn that some judges couldn't be bought, intimidated, or fooled. The summit was still 2 weeks away, but Judge Judy's real investigation was just beginning, and what she was about to uncover would make this corporate legal conference into something Karen Morrison would never forget. Tony Chen's initial research Findings landed on Judge Judy's desk 72 hours later, in a manila folder that felt heavier than its actual weight suggested. What she discovered inside made her hands tremble with barely contained rage, because the pattern of systematic, legal abuse was even worse than her darkest suspicions had imagined. Morrison Industries hadn't just bent the rules, they had weaponized America's legal system into a precision instrument of financial destruction, targeting small businesses, elderly plaintiffs, and working-class families who couldn't afford to fight back against an army of corporate attorneys. The case files Tony had assembled painted a horrifying picture of legal predation that stretched across multiple states and countless shattered lives. There was Robert Chen, a 54-year-old contractor whose small construction company was buried under an avalanche of frivolous lawsuits after he tried to collect payment for completed work. Morrison's legal team had filed 17 separate motions, demanded countless depositions, and stretched the case across 3 years until Chen's business collapsed under the weight of legal fees, forcing him to declare bankruptcy, while Morrison Industries celebrated another successful risk mitigation strategy. Then came the case of elderly couple Harold and Marge Peterson, both in their 70s, who had dared to file a product liability claim after Harold was injured by a defective ladder manufactured by one of Morrison's clients. Karen's legal machine had subjected them to invasive discovery demands, scheduling depositions during Harold's cancer treatments, and filing motion after motion designed to exhaust their limited resources. The Petersons eventually dropped their case not because they were wrong, but because they couldn't afford to be right against Morrison's unlimited legal budget. But it was the file marked Martha Rodriguez that stopped Judge Judy cold, her heart sinking as she read the details of what would become her personal call to arms. Martha had owned Rodriguez Family Restaurant, a small Mexican eatery in Queens that had been serving the community for over 20 years, employing local families and providing authentic food with the kind of love that only comes from genuine family recipes. When a Morrison Industries client wanted to acquire her building for development, Martha had respectfully declined their initial offers, hoping to pass the restaurant down to her children as she had always dreamed. Karen Morrison's response had been swift and merciless. Within weeks, Rodriguez Family Restaurant found itself drowning in a tsunami of legal challenges, health department complaints that materialized out of nowhere, zoning violations that had never existed before, and a barrage of nuisance lawsuits that consumed every penny Martha had saved over 2 decades of hard work. Morrison's attorneys had turned Martha's American dream into a legal nightmare, systematically dismantling her business through procedural warfare that left her defenseless against their unlimited resources. The final entry in Martha's file was a handwritten letter from her daughter, Elena, describing how her mother had died 6 months after losing the restaurant, her spirit broken by a legal system she had believed would protect honest, hardworking people like herself. She kept saying she didn't understand how being right could be so wrong, Elena had written. She died believing the law had abandoned her. The night before the summit, Judge Judy sat alone in her hotel room overlooking the glittering Houston skyline. Martha Rodriguez's handwritten letter spread out on the desk before her like evidence in the most important case of her career. She wasn't rehearsing talking points or polishing a keynote speech because what she was preparing for had nothing to do with corporate presentations and everything to do with confronting a system that had perverted justice into a weapon against the innocent. The weight of Elena Rodriguez's words pressed against her chest like a physical force. She died believing the law had abandoned her. This wasn't about Judge Judy's reputation or her television career, or even her legendary courtroom persona. This was about Martha Rodriguez, who had believed in the fundamental promise of American justice that hard work and honesty would be rewarded, that the legal system existed to protect people like her from those who would exploit their power. Instead, Martha had discovered that in Karen Morrison's world, the law wasn't about right and wrong, it was about who could afford the biggest legal army and who was willing to use procedural warfare to crush anyone who stood in their way. Judge Judy thought about the oath she had taken decades ago, the solemn promise to uphold justice and defend those who couldn't defend themselves. She reflected on the countless cases she had presided over, the moments when she had been the last line of defense between powerful interests and vulnerable people who needed someone to speak truth to power. Tomorrow wouldn't be another television appearance or a speaking engagement for a generous fee. Tomorrow would be her chance to honor Martha Rodriguez's memory by exposing the truth that Karen Morrison had spent millions trying to bury. As she folded Elena's letter and placed it carefully in her briefcase, Judge Judy felt the familiar surge of righteous determination that had defined her entire career. She had faced down lying litigants, corrupt attorneys and manipulative corporations before, but never with stakes this personal or this clear. Martha Rodriguez had trusted the system and died broken-hearted when it failed her. Judge Judy wouldn't let that trust be betrayed without consequences. The judge who would walk into that conference center tomorrow morning wouldn't be there to play nice with corporate executives or deliver feel-good platitudes about legal ethics. She would be there as Martha Rodriguez's advocate, armed with evidence of systematic abuse and the unshakable conviction that some truths are too important to keep buried, regardless of who gets uncomfortable when they're exposed. Judge Judy arrived at the Houston Convention Center with Martha Rodriguez's letter tucked securely in her briefcase and a determination that radiated from her like heat from a furnace. The backstage area buzzed with corporate energy, but that atmosphere shifted the moment 3 security guards approached her with the kind of purposeful stride that meant trouble was about to unfold. "Judge Sheindlin," the lead guard said, his voice carrying the uncomfortable tension of someone delivering bad news. "There's been a change of plans. Ms. Morrison has requested that we escort you from the premises immediately." His hand hovered near her arm, clearly expecting compliance from someone who had probably never been escorted anywhere against her will in her entire life. Judge Judy's response was swift and devastating. She opened her briefcase and withdrew Elena Rodriguez's handwritten letter, holding it up like a piece of evidence that could convict the guilty. "Before you lay a hand on me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades in courtrooms, "I want you to hear something from Elena Rodriguez, whose mother died because your boss turned the legal system into a weapon." She began reading, aloud, her voice steady but filled with controlled fury. "My mother worked 16-hour days for 20 years building her restaurant. Karen Morrison's lawyers destroyed it in 6 months with lawsuits that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with forcing her to sell. She died believing she had failed, when the real failure was a system that lets people like Karen Morrison buy victories." The guard stood frozen, unprepared for this moment of moral confrontation. The massive auditorium doors burst open with a thunderous crash as Judge Judy strode down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing through the stunned silence of 2,000 corporate executives who had expected a polite keynote about legal efficiency. Karen Morrison's voice faltered mid-sentence as she spotted the approaching figure. Her carefully rehearsed presentation about maximizing litigation outcomes dying in her throat as Judge Judy's presence filled the cavernous space with an undeniable force that no amount of corporate security could contain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Judy announced, her voice cutting through the shocked murmurs as she commandeered the microphone from a bewildered moderator. "My name is Judge Judy Sheindlin, and I'm here to tell you about Martha Rodriguez, a woman who can no longer speak because the practices being celebrated at this summit killed her." The auditorium erupted in confused whispers as Judge Judy pulled Elena's letter from her briefcase, holding it aloft like damning evidence in a murder trial. Karen Morrison's face had gone ashen, her polished corporate composure cracking like ice under pressure as Judge Judy continued her devastating testimony. Martha Rodriguez owned a small restaurant in Queens that served her community for 20 years. When she refused to sell to one of Ms. Morrison's clients, they unleashed a legal assault that would make a medieval siege look merciful. The audience, accustomed to sanitized discussions of legal strategy, found themselves confronting the human cost of the tactics they had come to learn. Judge Judy's voice rose with righteous fury as she read directly from Elena's letter. "They filed 67 separate legal actions against my mother's restaurant health violations that materialized overnight. Zoning complaints for a building that had passed inspection for decades. Nuisance lawsuits designed to bleed her dry. She spent her life savings fighting cases that had no merit but unlimited funding." Several executives in the front row shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own company's tactics in the devastating account. "Karen Morrison," Judge Judy said, turning to face the CEO directly, her gaze boring into Morrison's soul with the intensity of a laser. "Martha Rodriguez worked 16-hour days to build something beautiful for her community. Your legal team destroyed it in 6 months using procedural warfare that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with crushing someone who couldn't fight back. How many more Martha Rodriguez stories are buried in your company's files?" Morrison attempted to regain control, her voice shaking as she stammered, "Judge Sheindlin, this isn't the appropriate forum for—" But Judge Judy cut her off with the commanding presence that had made her a household name. "This is exactly the appropriate forum. You invited me here to legitimize legal tactics that destroy innocent people's lives. Martha Rodriguez died believing she had failed when the real failure was a system that allowed you to weaponize justice itself." The auditorium had become a powder keg of emotion. Corporate attorneys were frantically checking their phones. Several summit sponsors were heading for the exits, and a group of younger lawyers near the back stood up and began a slow clap that spread through sections of the crowd like wildfire. The convention center's head of security appeared at the side of the stage, but when he saw Judge Judy's unwavering stance and heard the growing applause, he simply removed his radio and walked away, refusing to be part of silencing the truth. Judge Judy's final words rang through the stunned auditorium like a battle cry. Martha Rodriguez's daughter asked me to tell people the truth about how corporate America uses our legal system as a weapon. That truth is this: when lawyers become hired guns instead of officers of the court, justice dies, and people like Martha Rodriguez pay the ultimate price. If watching Judge Judy expose corporate legal corruption live on stage just blew your mind, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell right now, because this story is about to get even more explosive, and you don't want to miss what happens when the most powerful judge in America declares war on a system designed to crush the innocent. The auditorium erupted in chaos as Judge Judy's words reverberated through the corporate elite, with dozens of executives canceling contracts with Morrison Industries on the spot. Karen Morrison fled the stage in humiliation, her legal empire crumbling as whistleblowers emerged from her own company. Within hours, Martha Rodriguez's story had gone viral, sparking federal investigations into corporate legal abuse and inspiring new legislation protecting small businesses from frivolous litigation warfare. Judge Judy had done more than expose one corrupt executive. She had ignited a movement that would reshape how America's legal system serves justice instead of profit. Martha Rodriguez finally had her voice, and it was roaring. If you want to see more truth-tellers take on corrupt power structures, subscribe now and join the fight for real justice. Because when good people stay silent, the system wins, but when they speak up, everything changes.